Hello, I'm Mark Snowden, and this is People Teams Training, job number 6, leader training. We're making progress as we take a look at the different ways that you serve as a missionary, reaching across different people segments, different nationalities, different people groups. And in this session, we're going to take a look at leaders. You can see where that fits in our 7 missionary jobs: evangelism, small groups, and leaders particularly. And remember, with small groups, we're just not talking about a nice Bible study, but we're talking about a Bible study that can actually become a church, and you'll need to be able to equip and develop leaders for that to really be a success and to see that happen. Okay, this is kind of where we are in the people teams process. Mobilization happened. You're getting your training together for your team and specifically the roles. You've been evangelizing, I hope, and getting those small groups going. And now we're actually going to talk about not just training any leaders from the outside, but training leaders from the inside, being able to send out these indigenous leaders so that they can keep the process going, getting small groups going so your group doesn't have to, but they can continue sending out leaders, making not only small groups happen, but be able to, as you can see here, have small groups that become new churches. This is also a good time for a people teams checkpoint. If you need to stop on any of these, please do. But I would like for each one of the team members to report on your roles. If you are ideally in multiple teams that are meeting together, perhaps all of the team leads can get together and report. Perhaps all of the financial people, logistics, prayer people, and all of the team members that you've got can meet together and be able to report on your roles. Then we want the team leaders to report on their master plans to everybody. We want to be able to continue to learn from everybody. So that is going to be important for this session as you get it started. Also, the presentation of the final worldview documents should be happening soon, if not already. You should have gotten the materials or the things that you want that really does help you to identify your worldview of the people or population segment that you're working with, and then also to report to the group the story sets that you have for evangelism and for discipleship. What are you going to use to share the good news of Jesus with? What are you going to do to be able to do long-term discipleship? That's going to be important no matter what you do. But this is a very good team checkpoint. Stop and do if you need to. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. I wanted to start off with something called missionaries of character. I would like for each one of you to do this. When I was at the North American Mission Board, I was challenged to come up with character that missionaries would exhibit. And one of the first things I did was to Google all the different Bible studies and things that have been done on character of a Christian. I've seen some Bible studies that have 52 character qualities, I suppose, one for every week of the year. But what I started really examining was 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus and Philemon. We call these Paul's pastoral letters, and pulled out of that these 10 character qualities. Now, I've actually turned this into a Bible study or even a retreat. If you would like me to send it to you, I'll be glad to do it. Just email me at SnowdenMinistries@gmail.com. But what I started looking at were those qualities that Paul instructed either Timothy or Titus or Onesimus with Philemon to be able to have. I was quickly seeing that compassion was very important. I think all of these are presented in alphabetical order, okay? But compassion was first. Take a look at courage and perseverance. I think kind of those go hand in hand. What about faith? Does it take faith to be a missionary? I believe it does. Friendship. Paul loved Timothy and Titus especially. He called them, especially Timothy, his son in the faith. They really knew each other. They were honest with each other, and they had honesty back and forth in what they did. They were loyal to their task, not wanting to do anything that would be second, and really were all out in what they were trying to do. Even though Titus had written, really wanting to say, how much longer do I have to be in Crete? I get that. Perseverance, being able to continue, responsibility to the task and to the churches that sent them out, and certainly loyalty and responsibility going together with Paul. I was impressed also, even though it wasn't really said that much, but the self-discipline that it took, especially Timothy and Titus, to be able to have, and then teamwork. They had at one point all been with the Apostle Paul. Paul did a great job of not just discipling, but of producing leaders that were part of teams that either evangelized or actually went and trained believers and just did a phenomenal role. If you take a look at the missionary force these days that are on the field, why do they come off the field? Is it because God told them of some change to their missionary call? Did they run out of money? All of these are possible, but we find increasingly the reason that missionaries need to come off the field is because of some kind of moral failure. And that's a shame. Going out to the missionary field, there should be no pressure, no misunderstanding that there's going to be persecution. There's going to be a call for self-discipline. There's going to be a call for courage. There's going to be a call for friendship and loyalty. All of these fit together, not only to keep a missionary on the field and keep them working, but ever closer to our Lord, ever closer in their walk as a fellow believer with each other, being able to be a part of a team that's making Christian advance. Let's take a look at Acts chapter 14. I want to go back to Paul's first missionary journey. There on that left picture, we see Paul and Barnabas going out with John Mark. And then you see John Mark gone when they were actually being able to witness and talk to those people that they encountered. They moved way beyond Antioch Pisidian that we talked about in the first missionary journey. They went over to Lystra and Derbe and Iconium, so many of the different places where Paul was able to get a church going. If you look at chapter 14, verses 21 to 23, it said, after Paul had preached the gospel in that town, Derbe, and in other places, he encouraged many in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the disciples by encouraging them to continue in the faith and by telling them it is necessary to go through many hardships in order to enter the kingdom of God. When they had appointed elders for them in every church and prayed with fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. And then they passed on and returned back to Antioch that was in Syria. These scripture verses show Paul being able to appoint, and Barnabas, to appoint leaders in every church that he went to. These leaders were called elders. Pastors, that phrase of shepherd or pastors is mentioned in 1st and 2nd Peter, but it really didn't become part of the early church until 125 AD. We see that Paul made sure that he did not leave a church until it had leaders among it. I had a call one time from a missionary couple that were serving faithfully among a Muslim group here in the United States. And they were really praying and seeking wisdom about moving to another town that had even more of the people group where they were going to work. And that was incredible dedication. It meant moving jobs. It meant moving families. That was a really big deal. And thinking about these Bible verses in Acts 14:21 through 23, I simply ask, if you leave, will the work stop where you are, or will it continue? Do you have a leader in place that can take your place? And they didn't. So they prayed about it, and they never moved to another town and found their ministry. They redoubled it specifically to have followers of Jesus and disciples, but also to have leaders. That biblical foundation is very important to get in this today, and I appreciate your work and ministry to do that. Let's take a look at the Bible, and we're going to do two things. We're going to talk about identifying leaders, and we're going to talk about equipping leaders. And there's a lot of things that I'm going to talk about, but basically in this session, you basically are going to have two things: identifying and equipping leaders. How do you identify who a leader is in the first place? If you take a look at Timothy and Titus, they were serving in different places and they were trying to work themselves out of a job. That's what missionaries like to do. But it was different how they did it. Timothy was very affirming in the roles that the church leaders were supposed to have. Ephesus had a fairly mature church that was going on. They had different roles. They had those offices. They had those apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherd teachers. They had all of those that were working together, where Titus really was struggling. Paul did not give the command to Titus not to appoint a leader like he told Titus to. He told Titus to make sure that they'd been a believer for a couple of years or a little while so they wouldn't be puffed up with pride. With Titus, he was like, appoint those leaders, and didn't say anything about a time limit, and be able to get those leaders going. Titus was aspiring to be able to even have leaders in the place like Crete. So we're looking at two different types of leaders, and both of those are scriptural. Both of those are okay. All right, let's take a look at what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 through 13. Here we see the biblical qualifications for pastors, elders, and overseers, as well as deacons. Now, I mentioned the pastors mainly because the churches, as I was saying, didn't even have the shepherding role of pastoring. They had elders, just like they were familiar with, having come out of a Jewish background where they had elders running the synagogues, okay, and also some rabbis. And then also they had overseers. Overseers is more of an administrative role that they did to be able to make sure the doors were open, to make sure that the scriptures, the scrolls were taken care of. Anybody that was an overseer was taking care of the business or the practice that it took to be able to have church, just like you would think of a pastor in a church today. And then you also had the role of deacon. Deacons were those that were in a servant role. They had a past record of service, and you have qualifications for these two in 1 Timothy chapter 3. If you'd like to stop and read those out loud, just continuing through in those 13 verses, that's fine. Please do. Now let's talk about leaders that are leading churches that multiply. If you look, I saved this diagram instead of the last diagram. I believe I heard this from Curtis Sargent, that small things multiply quicker. If you look at the gestation period of a whale, it's a year. Where you take a look at rabbits, they can have little bunnies every month. That's really incredible. But you take a look at having one offspring a year versus, a litter, or I don't even know what you would call, where rabbits just have a bunch of little baby rabbits. When we're talking a look at starting a church, none of these are wrong, okay? None of these are bad. If you take a look at starting a new church a year, wow, that is fantastic. I know of very few churches that start a church in a year. But what if you could start 4 or 5 churches simultaneously every month? Wouldn't that be incredible? When you take a look at keeping up with the birth rate of your community, a baptism rate is going to have to be something like that. But yet so few of our churches do. And it's because we don't really have a good mechanism in place for identifying, equipping, and then releasing, giving authority to these leaders to be able to lead a church and be able to multiply. So let me cast vision that my friend Ronnie Fox came up with. He called it the reproducibility math, and I'm calling it the reproducibility math challenge. Okay, I need your mathematicians in your group. You're going to have fun with this. Here is your challenge. If you started one new church and then started with your daughter church every 6 months, how long would it take that church and those churches to have 100 new churches? Go. Pause me, by the way, because I'm going to keep going. What'd you do? Did it look something like this? If you were able to get one church in 6 months planted and have every church planted about every 6 months, it would start looking like this, so that at the end of going into your 4th year, you would have 128 churches planted. Wouldn't that be absolutely incredible if you started off with just one? So many times leaders and missionaries as well, get so excited about going from 0 to 1 that they kind of relax and take their foot off the pedal and aren't as focused or aggressive in how they do their work in the church. And so things kind of taper off. Also, there's not a challenge or a good model for training leaders, and we want to make sure that we help you with that today. Isn't that wild? I appreciate Ronnie Fox doing all the math. I trust his math. He's a good guy. But he also added something that I thought was important. If you had a house church, let's say, that had 10 members in every house church, man, you're talking about 1,280 new believers. Now, you're not going to, what we call sheep stealing from another church that is from another flock of believers, but you're going to start each new church with new believers. Isn't that absolutely fantastic to be able to do that? Okay, let's go to the next level, all right? Let's see what happened if, how many new churches would a church start in a year if it started, there's a typo there, 2 new churches every 6 months. Could you imagine? Okay, do the math and I'll come back to you. How long is it going to take to have 100 new churches? Here's your math. If you take a look at it, within only between 2.5 to 3 years, would you be able to get 100 churches started? In fact, at the end of year 3, at the end of year 3, you'd have 243 churches. Isn't that absolutely fantastic? But that's what it takes to really have a church planting movements where things really get beyond the control of those that start, but yet there is the constant interconnection and getting together to make sure the theology, we're going to talk about that, and the doctrine stays accurate and biblically on target. And how you train your leaders is really where the secret to the DNA of all of these churches are. DNA means what's going to be passed on in each one of these churches. I hope you enjoyed that. Ronnie Fox had a good time developing it. I appreciate him doing that and for all of his mathematical prowess. He's a good guy. All right, here's 2 quotes. The Reproducibility Math Challenge has 2 quotes that are important. Churches cannot multiply if they have no leaders to lead them. You want to say, duh, but I guess it's obvious that a lack of leaders typically holds back multiplication. I appreciate Ray being able to do that. Ray was a missionary for 25 years in East Asia, and he saw firsthand what happened if leaders and developing leaders were overlooked. And then Curtis Sargent also had something important to say. If you wait until you need leaders to train leaders, then it's already too late. If you can identify leaders and begin teaching them, coaching them, mentoring, being a silent partner, it makes all the difference in the world. So let's talk about this. When you go out into the mission field, you're going to see mobilization happen right out of Acts chapter 16. Here you had the missionary and the prophet mobilized out of the church at Antioch. Paul and Silas left. Okay, they identified the people that they were going to, and then they encountered 2 people along the way. They encountered Timothy and they encountered Luke. Now, I don't think you had any problem seeing the apostle being the missionary, Paul. The prophet, it says that Silas was a prophet, and that's actually in Acts 15. And then they met Timothy first, who was very much, we think of Timothy as being a pastor and certainly a teacher. And then we think of Luke being an evangelist because he wrote the Gospel of Luke and Acts to be able to help teach and train and help the early church recognize and be able to understand what was involved in sharing the good news of Jesus. I like those 4 characteristics, especially when you think about the resources being in the harvest. If you're starting out and it's just you maybe and another couple, or there's 2 couples going out, that's still great because the resources where you're going to get your leaders are going to come from the harvest field. Now, you take a look at Acts 16, those same 4 categories or 5 categories are in Ephesians 4:11. We've talked about that a few videos back. You've got, the apostle, you've got the prophet, you've got the evangelist, and you've got the shepherd teacher. I wonder if Paul saw the diversity of leaders in his missionary team being what was also success at Ephesus, where that church was, and seeing that diversity in leaders needed as being a spirit-given gift among those people in Ephesus. When you're going to start your church, are you going to just look for somebody that can be a pastor? Or what about somebody that's actively sharing their faith? What about somebody that can really explain scriptures and is always holding you right to a biblical foundation? And what about the missionary that's always trying to say, let's multiply, let's keep going, that are right there in your group? Because one of the things that you'll be doing as a missionary leader is mobilizing new workers from the harvest. When you take a look at these roles of missionary, prophet, and evangelist, it makes for the acronym of APE, okay? Our churches need more APEs. We need to be sending out missionaries, prophets, and evangelists. But you take a look at this diagram. Missionaries are a mile wide and an inch deep. Doctrinally, they want to reach as many people as they possibly can, save them from a Christless eternity, and they just see the aching lostness that's all around them. Meanwhile, you've got your shepherd teacher, your S&T, together, and they're wanting to really teach doctrine, and they're wanting to go as deep as they possibly can. I think to have a really healthy church, It really needs to be APEST led. Do you see the acronym? Apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. Being APEST led really is healthy. This is something to aspire to, okay? It's never going to be perfect at all, but focusing on lostness is something you can never forget at the same time that you're trying to disciple on the fly. You never reach a point where the church is so perfect or doctrinally so pure that you still can't be sending out people into the harvest field. All right. So, who's the leader? And let's start talking about their qualities. If you're really going to identify them, I want you to stop and do. I want you to look at the four of Jesus's followers and their qualities. And then I want you to look at Paul's missionary team and those four right out of Acts 15 and 16, 17, and take a look at their qualities and compare the two. And then I'll come back. I hope you had an opportunity to discuss these qualities. They're very important if you take a look at them. Simon Peter, John, Levi, Matthew, and Judas Iscariot do not really have much of a missionary mindset, even though Simon Peter did, and John ended up in John ended up in Ephesus, and even Levi. They were supposed to have fled from Jerusalem and went other places. I put Judas Iscariot in here because there's almost a truism with every small group that you start. And that truism is if Judas Iscariot was a traitor and he was one of the 12 that followed Jesus, then it makes sense that out of your group, you could easily have a betrayer, a traitor, somebody that does not exhibit what you're wanting them to. Don't be surprised if that happens. When you look at Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke, they were trying to get it right on the fly. They were going from town to town and being able to help disciple new believers and get churches started. Paul ended up writing almost every church and even more than he visited because he knew how important it was to maintain doctrinal purity. Now, I've got another stop and do. I want you to do this. Picture's from Louisville, and the African-American friend of mine is Lewis Fountain, and Leroy Fountain, excuse me. And you can do what he did. Everyone take as many squares of toilet paper as you think you'll need. You can stop and go to the bathroom, pull out a roll, and you can peel off as many as you think you'd need. Go ahead and stop and do, and when you've got your rolls, you can advance for your next instructions. All right, does everybody have at least one square of paper? And here's what you're supposed to do. Name a quality of a church leader for every square you pulled off. That's why those ladies were kind of chuckling with how many characteristics they were going to have to name. But those qualities will help you be able to determine, especially within a church context, what you see as leadership qualities. Now, as much as I would like those to just be qualities of a church, you may need to talk about a political leader, a mayor, the head of your parent-teacher organization, other organizations that you work with that you have been able to identify a character quality. Go ahead and do that. Name as many qualities as you can. Here are a list of some of the character qualities that I brainstormed working with people teams. Ethnicity, the ethicalness and biblical foundations of somebody that's serving builds high trust. And so some of this is not mentioned as just trust, but being focused, quality, enthusiastic. You can see all of these. I would say that a people person and somebody who's able to speak well is really a good quality character of a leader. And you might want to see somebody that's missions minded, being able to constantly be on the lookout for people that are lost is important. And it comes out of a deep compassion. Your character qualities are certainly good to be able to pull from as well. But that helps you, again, to identify local church leaders right out of the small group that you've started. There's a principle that I would love for you to read with me, if you would. Let's read this together. The biblical principle which allows churches to emerge, grow, govern themselves, reproduce naturally, and experience worship in the context of their own cultural norms and resources. What you're looking to establish as a missionary is a local church. Now, that local church will not have you for a long time. Again, I'm saying 2 years max and maybe shorter than that. But you've chosen a period of time that you're going to step away from a church, and those indigenous leaders need to be in place because they are going to have language. They're going to reproduce themselves faster and quicker than you ever could. They can actually have heart language sermons where you never could. I could see members of your church that you're planting developing their own worship songs. Hey, if Amazing Grace could be a bar tune that and the English church the church in England put spiritual words to, hey, why cannot that happen among your converts, among a specific people? Allow them to give their own testimonies and be biblically faithful. The other thing that you're going to need to take a look at is you are not going to appoint elders. Like, you're no Paul, you're no Barnabas. You can probably help seeing who the leaders need to be. Now, ideally, you will have churches aspire to calling their own pastor. You're setting the DNA in place where that will continue because leaders train leaders. Churches plant churches and leaders train leaders. There are two ways of taking a look at leaders, and we're going to actually come up with one name for a coach and a mentor, and we're going to call it a silent partner. You're going to see about becoming a partner to whatever leader is there. Now, the first one is a coach. A coach is very experienced. It understands and selects the next steps that he wants that leader to be able to take, whether it's a successful church plant or an evangelistic task or whatever they're doing. They're working constantly out of knowledge, of experience, especially in walking with God. And you compare that with a mentor. A mentor nurtures a missions partner. Traditionally, they ask questions. Well, what's next? What would you do? What do you believe the Lord is asking you to do? A mentor doesn't know everything. And that's pretty much where you are going to be. You're going to be more of a mentor than a coach. You are going to be helping them to grow and make decisions out of a growing base of experience as you walk with God as well. But it's the idea that your personal issues, you're going to help them with character, spiritual walk, and relationships, especially with integrity. All of those missionary character qualities we talked about, you're going to want them to have. And both of these provide an opportunity for you to become a partner, and specifically a silent partner. And we're going to talk about what it means to be a silent partner. Okay, that's a term that was first mentioned that we're aware of in 1828. I looked this up in Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, and they said that's when it was first known to the public. One of the things that's very characteristic of a silent partner is they have no voice in conducting business. And that's going to be hard from some of us type A, high control type people. You've got to let it go. You've got to be able to see the church be able to grow. And then you work with the leaders, especially the pastor behind the scenes. You help them, but you're not going to control the church. You are going to become a silent partner. Some, I believe Curtis Sargent, I've mentioned before, calls this a shadow mentor. Whatever you want to call it, it's a friend that is going to be there for the leaders of each of these new churches. And one of the things about the leaders that go out from a church is they've got to be willing to be a mentor as well. Okay, silent partners really do focus on the spiritual gifts of the people that they're going to be working among. There's such a thing called body life, and they're going to help the leaders be able to take on different characteristics that are required in a healthy church. Remember those 12 foundations? Yeah. They're going to work and make sure that all of those are not only happening, they're happening on a regular basis. The Bible is going to become authoritative. If you take a look at 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, we can read this verse together. I want you to be able to get it. Let's read it together. All scripture is inspired by God and is profitable for teaching, for rebuking, for correcting, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. And that's 2 Timothy 3:16 through 17. That is from the Christian Standard Bible. We're also going to take a look at decisions that a silent partner is going to help that church be able to make. And that is, do they lead with curriculum or without curriculum? Is the church able to develop their own set of Bible stories and use the Bible even if they don't have it in their language or they can't reproduce it? You've got to be the one to help determine that. You've got to help them figure out how they're going to self-feed in the process. You're going to be working with them so that infinitely they can generate Bible studies and sermons on God's Word. And then we have this phrase called MAL, model, assist, watch, and lead. That's at work. We're going to talk about this just for another second. Model, assist, watch, and lead is something that you're going to do. You start off in that red at the very top of this diagram, and you're going to get involved. You're going to try to develop relationships like crazy. Then you're going to follow Jesus' example and explain, be a servant, really be able to help them understand the parables that you're talking about and the training. And then you're going to use every bit of coaching that you possibly can to help them be guided as good as you possibly can. Some of that mentoring we've talked about is going to be simply asking questions. And then you're going to support, just like Jesus supported his disciples. You're going to go with them. You're going to take them out. You're going to counsel with them. You're going to provide feedback. You're going to correct them from time to time. But probably the most important is this purple, and that is empowering. You have got to release your leaders. You've got to have them have authority to be able to start on their own. Only when you give them some authenticity, then they will be able to move forward with the team, with the church that they are leading. So when you're taking a look at developing leaders, you typically go through a little bit of a process, and model, assist, watch, and leave is the simplest way of putting that. Okay, we've taken a look at options for training leaders, and the first one is self-feeding, where they turn to the Bible. Naglag is the second one. In a group, lead a group, and the third one is using Bible studies that a silent partner gives, and then they go and they help them. We're moving even further into equipping local church leaders. Let's take a look at each one of these three. If you're going to be self-feeding, it relies on you sticking to model, assist, watch, and leave. You can't just leave. And you can't just keep modeling it forever. There's got to be a point where you assist others. Now, the 5 W's can really help self-feeding. Who, what, when, where, and why. Those 5 W's really will help any Bible study that you have be able to learn from it, be able to seek God's will, be able to use that. Curtis Sargent had this, where I would have more head, heart, and hands asking questions of people that are out there. And then you have NAGLAG. If you've noticed, I've kind of messed with the acronym a little bit. In a group, lead a group. The idea is that you've got to have the disciple making ingrained. If you look at that picture just above where my head is located, that is an example of NAGLAG. You have somebody in a group and then they lead a group. They will attend a group and then they'll be able to teach others also. What happens in this is that every disciple becomes a planter. And it really is a truism. What is caught is what's being taught. So they'll be able to pass it on. There's also high accountability with NAGLAG. There's got to be a point of connection so that whoever is there continues to have the right doctrine and discipline, and it doesn't wander off and do things like you have to be baptized every time you get together. You don't do that, or you do something else. You have to give 10% of your income, or you get a bill from the church. No, you don't do that. So it's the idea of being self-taught, but it's the idea of using some kind of curriculum that you develop or you use for others that really works among that area, among that people or that population segment. The idea is that the silent partner assists, but is going to model, assist, watch, and leave. This will help you be very effective. And then you take a look at the last one, Bible studies. That last one is the Bible studies that you are actually going to be conducting with the silent partner. The silent partner, you as the missionary will be that silent partner. You will get with the leader, especially meeting with the pastor, and be able to have Bible studies with them. It helps the local leaders be recognized as the authority because they get up and they see you participating in the small groups, but you are not actually going to be leading them. I will say this, this method does require somebody that is pretty high quality and really is willing to stick with it as a silent partner. And be able to be very careful in how they transition out. Even the group is going to sense the transition as the leader starts taking it over. I would like to think that they would vote, that they would endorse, and that whoever is going to be their pastor is going to not only be obvious to you, but to them as well. And it may even be something you have to put to a vote. Typically, this is curriculum driven. Now, I want to provide 2 Bible studies that will be helpful to you as you are trying to train leaders. This Bible study is free. I broke it into 2 different parts. I had Avery Willis help me because we took the Disciples Cross and we updated a little bit, and we had approval in 1996. We had approval in the year 2012 with what had been done in 1996 and updating that. And Avery was with me every step of the way in developing it. We first of all listed all of the ministries that a church does. Discipling was so important in multiplying disciples using that model, assist, watch, and leave method that I created a whole different Bible study. As a matter of fact, it was this Bible study. If you guys know me, you know that Avery and I wrote a book together, Truth That Sticks, that I can highly recommend. And using these two sets of Bible studies that go 16 weeks, 8 in each, really does help and makes these ministries come alive. As you study and work through that each week, then the pastor especially and the leaders go and they introduce that to the church so that within 16 weeks, they're taking on the characteristics of a healthy church in these 16 lessons. And I'll make them available to you for free from SnowdenMinistries at gmail.com. Okay, I want to provide kind of a timeline for you guys to take a look at here. You started off with mobilization. Mobilization does people search, identifying of people, and you did that before even the first month. And then we've been doing people teams training, learning how to do cross-cultural things, developing evangelism and discipling small groups. You're using the catching fire for the new believers, and you continue with that people teams training for new believers. But look at that. New small groups up there are getting ready to take off, and you're going to be training the leaders along with them. Now, I've got those two studies, church ministries and multiplying disciples. But there's other studies as well, one on spiritual warfare, equipping leaders. There's a lot that you can actually have to help your small group going. As a matter of fact, since developing people teams originally in 2012 and writing Truth That Sticks in 2010, I've been working to develop Bible story sets and have more than 30 of those available. And each, like, 2 or 3 of them have 35 Bible studies in, and it can go from September to May. If you're looking for long-term Bible studies, that might be something to be able to do. It also helps you be able to provide a theological background and a doctrinal stance for each one of the leaders of the churches, particularly the pastors, and being able to help those churches transition to a church phase is what you're really about. It should be almost just a natural process of moving from a small group to a church that multiplies. And I think it will really be able to help you be able to do that. All right. Becoming silent partners, you take a look at all of that. You're moving from leadership to a support position. You're going to be conducting weekly training meetings with pastors, as well as being in the small group or a church. You're going to model, assist, watch, and leave until you are no longer leading a Bible study and a pastor or a church leader is, and then review. We can talk about constantly going from small groups to churches, help small groups get going that can become multiplying. And through all of that, you are going to take a lead, and then you're going to become a silent partner, keeping that going. You may even, if you have several small groups formed simultaneously, you can bring all of those leaders together and start mentoring them. And it really does make a difference. Okay, in your weekly training meeting, you can have prayer. You may want to take a screenshot of this. This is actually it's called Models for Ministry, and having prayer and a Christian song when you get with them. Model in that weekly meeting what you want them to do in a church service. Have a scripture verse. Review the previous study. Hold them accountable for obedience. Then introduce a new Bible study. Give them a new Bible verse, and then pray with your leaders beyond the group. But have leaders constantly being developed. I would love to see there be everybody being a leader, holding them accountable for reproducing. But you'll have to see how your leaders are and how they can make it work. To finish up, job number 6, training leaders. I would like to challenge you, especially if you're not by yourself, to plan a sending service, okay? Have it be about 1 hour. I want you to plan refreshments, invite family members, your friends, and have certificates. Now, this will be a little bit different than your church having a commissioning service. This is just going to be among those that have gone through this training. Next session, number 7, is our last one, and we'll plan a sending service at the very end of that for you to be able to use. In the leader guide, the learning guide that I've been passing out, there is actually an appendix that has the outline of a sending service and a commissioning service in the back. You can email me at SnowdenMinistries@gmail.com. Thank you for being a part of People Teams Training, job number 6, leader training.